Welcome to Mr. Hutchings History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
Okay, so you really want to get Iran right. Like, not just the headlines we're seeing today, but like the deep roots of it all. Well, today we're going back in time to 1946.
Okay.
World War II just ended.
Yeah.
Everyone's breathing a sigh of relief.
Yeah.
Except in Iran.
Right.
They're about to get a crash course in Cold War politics.
Yeah, that's right. Sometimes you really need to dig into the past to understand what's going on in the present.
Yeah.
And this period, oh, this is a big one. Broken promises, power grabs, oil, lots of oil.
We're talking about the time when Stalin just decided, like, nope, these Iranian oil fields, they're mine now.
Yeah.
Never mind that he promised he wouldn't do that.
Right.
And the crazy thing is, this wasn't just some history book thing. The impact of this is still shaping global politics today.
For sure.
So picture it.
Yeah.
1946, the war's over. Iran's been hanging out with Soviet and British troops for years, like, come on in, make yourselves at home. Now they're like, okay, guys, time to go home, you promised.
Exactly.
Everyone's like, right, good point. Packs up, leaves. But Stalin,
He sees those oil fields and he's like, finders keepers.
seriously.
I mean, they had this whole thing at the Tehran conference back in '43. Troops leave when the war's over. Everyone agreed.
And he just ignored it.
Pretty much. And he saw an opportunity, right? Resources, influence, a foothold in a really important region.
I mean, can you imagine the audacity? It's like, we have a deal, a signed agreement, and you're just going to throw it out the window.
We'll move.
No wonder everyone in the West was freaking out.
Yeah.
Some historians, they call them the Orthodox school. They say this is classic Stalin, Soviet expansionism, plain and simple. Like, he was this untrustworthy communist mastermind, always looking for a way to spread his influence.
Right. But then you have these other historians, the revisionists, and they're like, hold on a second. Wasn't the West overreacting a bit?
Okay.
I mean, Iran shares a border with the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
Maybe Stalin had some genuine security concerns?
Okay, so it's either Stalin was power hungry or he was paranoid.
Or maybe a little both.
Right. Because history is rarely black and white.
Never. Which is where the realist school comes in. They're all about cutting through the ideology and saying, look, this was about power and resources.
Power and resources, the classics.
Stalin wanted that Iranian oil, plain and simple.
Okay. But it's never that simple, is it?
Of course not. You've also got the post-revisionist perspective, and they add another layer of complexity to the whole thing.
Okay, how so?
Well, they say it wasn't just one side's fault. It was this perfect storm of Soviet aggression, sure, but also Western missteps, misunderstandings, this huge lack of trust on both sides.
And meanwhile, you've got Iran stuck in the middle of all of this.
Right. Trying to be this new independent nation, find their place in the world, and they've got these two superpowers playing tug of war with their country.
Talk about a diplomatic nightmare. So what did Iran do?
They did something pretty daring, actually.
What?
They took their case to the United Nations.
To the UN.
Yep. Brand new organization. Big stage.
Wow. That's a pretty big deal, right? For Iran, but also for the UN. Like, it's kind of a trial by fire for this new world peace organization.
Right. Huge deal. I mean, the UN was barely a year old at this point.
Right. Talk about being thrown into the deep end. So you've got Iran, this young nation, standing up in front of the whole world saying, hey, this isn't right. What happened? Did anyone even listen?
Oh, they got people's attention, all right. All eyes were on the UN Security Council, especially on Stalin.
Because he couldn't exactly ignore the UN, could he? Not with the U.S. and Britain backing up Iran.
It was a big moment. This wasn't just some regional thing anymore. It was like this flashpoint in the Cold War.
Right, because the U.S. and Britain, they saw Stalin moving into Iran and they thought, here we go again.
Exactly. To them, it was like Stalin was trying to throw out the whole rule book for the post-war world.
So what did Stalin do?
Well, he pushed back a little at first, but then he surprised everyone. By May of 1946, the Soviet troops started leaving Iran.
He backed down.
He backed down.
Okay, so problem solved.
Not so fast. The troops might have left, but the whole thing left a scar, you know? Especially when it came to trusting the Soviet Union.
Right, it's like if he'll break his word once.
Exactly. It wasn't just about the troops. It was about the bigger picture. Agreements, trust, the foundation they were trying to build a new world order on.
It's like Stalin just poured gasoline on the Cold War tensions.
Yeah, oof.
Yeah, it played right into those fears that the West had about Stalin wanting to expand Soviet power however he could.
And that's why they came up with things like the Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan. To try and box Stalin in.
It's all connected. That one event in Iran, that broken promise, it really pushed the U.S. to try and contain communism any way they could.
Wow. So this one event in Iran changed how the U.S. dealt with the Soviet Union for years.
In a lot of ways, yeah, it became this fight for global power, for who would lead the world,
All because of what happened in Iran back in 46. But what about Iran in all of this? I mean, here they are, stuck between these superpowers. Right, and that's the thing about these kinds of situations. It's the countries caught in the middle that really feel the consequences.
They're trying to figure out being a new country, and they get caught in this Cold War tug-of-war.
And they had to deal with the fallout, not just at the time, but for years to come. Think about it, their worldview, their relationships with other countries, even their own internal politics.
It's like a crash course in just because you have something valuable doesn't mean everyone's going to play nice.
Exactly. Iran had to walk this really fine line. They wanted to be their own country, make their own choices, but they also had to deal with these powerful countries trying to tell them what to do. It's a tough spot to be in, for sure, and you can really see how that one event back in 46 is still echoing today, right? All the stuff we're seeing in the region, it's connected.
Okay, but someone listening might be thinking, this is fascinating and all, but the Cold War's over, right? So how does this affect us now?
Well, the Cold War might be history, but it's like an earthquake. The tremors can be felt for generations, and that whole crisis in Iran, that wasn't just some random Tuesday. It set the stage for how things work even now.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Give me an example. What's the connection to today?
Look at all the tension around oil and resources in the Middle East today. It didn't just appear out of nowhere. The struggle for control, those proxy wars, big global powers sticking their noses in it, all goes back to this history.
So you're saying that to really understand what's happening now, we need to get this history.
Exactly. It's like walking into a movie halfway through. You might catch some of the plot, but you're missing a lot of context, right?
Yeah, you need the whole story.
And maybe, just maybe, if we understand how we got here, we can make better choices going forward.
Learn from our mistakes and all that.
Exactly. Because what happened in 1946, it wasn't inevitable, right? People made choices, governments made choices, and those choices had big consequences that we're still dealing with.
It's like those choose-your-own-adventure books, but with global superpowers. And speaking of choices, remember how Iran went to the UN for help? That was a big gamble, wasn't it?
It was a gutsy move. I mean, the UN was brand new. No one knew if it would actually work. But you know what? It did, at least partly. The Soviets did back down, proving that even a small country could stand up to a superpower, and the UN could help.
So that's a win for the UN then.
It was a win, but it also showed the limits of what the UN could do. Let's be real. The Soviets probably backed down more because of international pressure and their own calculations than anything the UN did.
They weren't afraid of a sternly worded letter?
Not exactly, but it did set the stage for how the UN would work during the Cold War. More of a mediator, a place for dialogue, not a global superpower police force.
Which sounds familiar.
Right. Even today, the UN is still trying to figure out how to be effective in a world where might often makes right, unfortunately.
Makes you think, what if we could go back to 1946? Knowing what we know now, what would we do differently?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? But it's why we look at history. To learn from the past, to understand the present, and hopefully to create a better future.
It's all connected.
It really is.
So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, haven't we? Broken promises, power grabs, a whole new world order.
And it all started with Iran in 1946.
And we're still feeling those ripples today.
Exactly. So next time you see Iran in the news, take a minute. Think back to 1946. Broken promises, power struggles, a young nation caught in the middle of it all.
It's a story that's still being written.
And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder it all. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.